And now it's time for our last session, the last knowledge session. That's the plenary session number 7. After this, we'll have the valedictory function. चलते चलते पहुंच गए हैं हम अपने आखिरी plenary session पर. It's social inclusion, HR policy and social security measures for building resilience in corporate governance. The panel will explore how fostering an inclusive workplace, implementing robust HR policies, and integrating effective social security measures can collectively contribute to building resilience in the realm of corporate governance. And chairing this session is a very dynamic and very talented Shri Rajendra Ratnoo ji, an IAS officer of 2001 batch of Tamil Nadu Cadre. He is presently serving as Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. He has effectively steered NIDM for furthering cooperation in humanitarian assistance, disaster relief and climate change adaptation. He was also keynote speaker for G20 online event by Asian and Pacific Center for Transfer of Technology. Before joining NIDM, he was working as Joint Secretary, Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, DPIIT, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. Where he was working, we was looking after international coordination with European countries, including India's participation in World Economic Forum Davos, National Industrial Corridor Program, and India International Convention Center. He was the chief architect for the new industrial development schemes for Jammu and Kashmir. Shri Rajendra Ratnoo ji was awarded with Prime Minister's National Award for effective implementation of NREGS works. He was recognized as the best collector for effective public grievance redressal in his district, for which he won the Chief Minister's Award twice. He's been conferred with Yuva Ratna Award by the government of Rajasthan and Professional Efficiency Award by Rotary International. An accomplished and dynamic officer of Indian Administrative Service, Shri Rajendra Ratnoo ji, chairing this session. May I have the honor of inviting him on stage. So I'll be introducing our co-chair after some time, as he's expected to join us soon. Let me take this opportunity to invite the other panelists on stage. Dr. Sunita Reddy is also with us. Dr. Sunita Reddy is a trained, she's trained in medical anthropology, currently is an associate professor at the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She has 15 years of teaching experience and has taught briefly at Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi, and Department of Sociology, Delhi School of Economics. She has researched on various issues of women and child health, breastfeeding practices, tribal women's health, childbirth and child rearing practices among the tribes. She has researched on disaster issues from social science perspectives and published a book, Clash of Waves Post-Tsunami Relief and Rehabilitation in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Her current areas of research is medical tourism and reproductive tourism and surrogacy issues. We will also be joined by Dr. Manu Gupta, co-founder of SEEDS. He is building resilient communities across Asia Pacific, has been at the forefront of championing and advocating for citizen-led initiatives. He brings ground realities to global perspectives and is actively involved in global conversations on humanitarian issues. Shri Chakradhari Rowe will also be joining us. He's one of the best security professionals, specialist in protection and counter-terrorism. His security startup, Tango 6 O'Clock LLP, is into offering turnkey solutions to private security agencies, close protection units, institutions, and other critical assets. Member of Global Counter-Terrorism Council, a think tank working relentlessly to bringing policy and diplomacy together to solve terrorism issues. And we have the co-chair with us now. Pleasure to announce about Shri Harjeet Singh, a global expert on the issues of climate impacts, migration and adaptation. He has been supporting countries across the world on tackling climate change, works as the head of global political strategy at Climate Action Network International and the global engagement director at the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. He is member of the United Nations Technical Expert Group on Comprehensive Risk Management under Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. He has co-founded Satat Sampada, a social enterprise that promotes sustainable and environmental solutions such as organic food and farming in India and beyond. And that's our panel. He's co-chairing. Please join us. Over to the chair, Shri Rajendra Ratnoo ji.
We have effectively around 45 minutes. So, yes. So how much is each panelist would you like to take around? So we'll keep 5 to 7 minutes for each speaker and then keep the house for some questions. We're glad that the topic is very, very relevant, and particularly for a country like India with so much of diversity and all forms of possible diversity we have, whether in terms of geographical diversities or cultural diversities in linguistic form or in food forms or in any other forms. Yet we are all together and we are one, so that is the beauty of this nation. And social inclusion, HR policy and social security measures for building the resilience. So I'll just bring slightly the perspective on this thing, because being from government we should not be prejudging, so we'll be looking forward to hear the more diverse views, because whole inclusion, the topic on inclusion should not be led by narrowing down that, so we'll keep it as vast and as lucid as possible. The three key words in this topic is the social inclusion, HR policy and social security measures for building resilience. I'll be slightly touching upon inclusion and HR policy. From the disaster risk reduction point of view, inclusion becomes very, very important, because it is the matrix of this divergence of the society and which is reflected in each organization. And that diversity is seen into our workforces, that diversity is in the government organization, that is in all other business supply chains. And the biggest cause of climate change or the extreme events of disaster is often by the ones who are at margin of society, those who are most vulnerable. They pay the maximum price. So in that context it becomes very important that how we create resilience. So how the inequities have to be countered by more inclusive policy. So it's an equalizer. This year's theme of the World International Disaster Risk Reduction also was fighting inequalities. And the National Institute of Disaster Management has taken this theme very seriously. And we started our engagement with the disability sector, with a gender perspective, and also from the poverty angle. I still remember that UNDRR's older version, that is International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction, one of their themes long back was on microfinance as a tool for disaster risk reduction. That has, slightly baffled my mind कि microfinance तो self-help group से related subject है और disaster में कैसे manage करेंगे. Then when you go deeper, you understand that for the poor, it is the economic empowerment which is the biggest cushion for disasters. So from that perspective, the policies in the corporate sector also, that how gender sensitive, gender inclusive, how your recruitment policies are more, your HR policies are more equitable for different categories of people, how you understand this, many times, we get swayed away and we have a very much, I feel that in industry, you require a very divergence of skills. Maybe somebody may be disabled, but maybe very dexterous, maybe locomotor disability, but with the hands they may have a great, dexterity. So having some windows open for these people who are at margin of society into our recruitment policy also. So many of the corporates are having in place their policies and guidelines, but many of the corporates are still not having in place many of these policies and guidelines. I'll be coming to the government law framework in 1 or 2 minutes. I'll be touching upon that. So we need to see that in the corporate world also, how we can promote inclusivity, mentorship programs and affinity groups, fostering a sense of belongingness among employees, and implementing inclusive hiring practices that foster a culture of diversity, equity and inclusion. For example, I come to understand that Tata Group in India has been recognized for its efforts in promoting diversity and inclusion with initiatives like Tata Engage, focusing on employees volunteering. I have nothing to do with Tata Group. I have never no plans of this thing. It's incidentally that I came while searching on webs. There may be many other organizations doing such inclusive policies, so you can mention them as well. In HR policy also, for example, some of the companies have come up with a very flexible working hours. So it may not be possible for the tech-savvy companies and those who are working in the digital space into the electronics and telecommunication, where the more IT-based kind of thing there, they had a dual advantage. On one side, they have cut down on their overheads by externalizing their costs and allowing employees to work from whichever place they want to. And other side, there is also good thing is that their production process and this thing does not get affected if there is a disaster, because this entire communication and other things go on. So I think these are some of the lessons which many companies have learned, and I think it is a post-COVID we have emerged into a new, culture of work culture. Similarly, social security measures also to enhance health safety protocols, financial assistance programs, and to have that how insurance and other tools are there, in the corporate sector. Many of the corporate have, while many more they lack well-defined emergency response plans, leaving employees vulnerable during disasters. So having a disaster management plan of a corporate itself is a very first step towards inclusion, and then second thing you have to see that whether your disaster management plan is only about a response oriented, or you are also having the mitigation strategies into the place, and whether the social inclusion and socially and environmental responsible policies are making a part of your disaster management plan. Being from government, I think it is also my duty to put into place the perspective of the government and some of the initiatives of Indian government or the legal framework that exists towards the more inclusive policies from, for example, the Companies Act, the Corporate Social Responsibilities Initiative in India is a major game-changing thing. You may debate that how many companies are contributing, some of them may be cheating, doing circuiting kind of thing, but still there is a huge amount of spending has increased into the social sector, which indirectly works towards more inclusive and fighting inequalities. I think जो गरीब है या जो हाशिए पे खड़ा है उसको वो तो हर रोज एक डिजास्टर और विपदा का सामना करता है, वो सुबह से शाम तक डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट ही करता है, तो उनकी रेजिलियंस हमसे कहीं ज़्यादा है। जरूरत है कि उसमें किस तरह से हमारी नीतियां हैं वो समता की तरफ ले जाएं और विषमताओं को कम करें। हाउ इनइक्विटीज कैन बी रिड्यूस्ड थ्रू आवर पॉलिसी टूल्स, दैट इज अ बिग चैलेंज। इसी तरह से नेशनल वॉलंटरी गाइडलाइंस ऑन सोशल, एनवायरमेंटल एंड इकोनॉमिक रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑफ बिजनेसेस, दे आर देयर इन प्लेस इन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया. They are not enforceable, they are more voluntary, that they encourage, government encourages businesses to adopt them, and they have all the three dimensions, that is the social, environmental and economic responsibility of businesses towards their employees. National Skill Development Mission also helps in the employability, finishing skills, and it gives a equal opportunity to many of the members of the poorer society, that they get a fairer chance of entry into the corporate. So that is again one of very flagship program of the government. Similarly, National Action Plan on Climate Change also recognizes the importance of capacity building and training to address the climate change challenges. Similarly, ESI Act 1948 as well as Employee Provident Fund 1952, they provide the social security benefits to employees and ensuring financial support during the emergencies. And of course, the Disaster Management Act of 2005, under which the NDMA, NDRF and my institute NIDM have been created, is also emphasizes on preparing engaging with the corporate. That's the mandate given to us under the Disaster Management Act, and also disaster management plans, which indirectly emphasizes the social security measures in the corporate sector also. So with that context, I think let me not go beyond that and be fairer to our panelists. So with that, may I request the co-chair to give.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for being slightly late. I was traveling this morning, and I live pretty far from here. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for initiating the conversation, and this is indeed extremely important. I'll not take much time. I can come in later so that our panelists have more time to speak. Just to build on what Mr. Ratnoo said, we are already living in a world where temperatures are now 1.2 degree warmer than the pre-industrial era. So the disasters that you see today are a result of this rising temperatures. And the way greenhouse gases are increasing, and we are not moving away from fossil fuels, the reality is that the temperatures are going to increase much more, and the predictions are, and as per the climate action plans from the entire set of countries, we are going to be touching more than 3 degree temperature rise, which is going to be devastating. And even at this moment, at this level of warming, the kind of disasters we are seeing are unprecedented and devastating, which means that nobody is untouched, and we need all hands on deck approach. And that's why a corporate sector has a very important role to play. And in any case, we are talking about a world where we leave no one behind. So it's really important for us to build resilience, but also making sure that we are ready to respond to disasters, because we've reached a point where adaptation is not enough, and we are reaching a situation beyond adaptation. So impacts are going to happen however hard we prepare, which means that we have to be preparing hard, but at the same time be ready for the disasters. And we also need a mindset shift. In the corporate world, normally it's about survival of the fittest, it's about the competitive edge. But when it comes to resilience, we have to think very differently. We have to think of people who have less capacity, who are marginalized, so which means that our approach has to be a lot more equitable and recognizing their different needs and realities and capacities. And that's in the best interest of business, because if we really want that business continuity, and it's not just a social responsibility, and that's why we need to be really investing in. And as Mr. Ratnoo said, there are various government policies, and corporations also have their own ways of enhancing social security. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from our panelists. But the important part is definitely training and capacity building, which is something that is also happening a lot at the international level, just to make sure that the human resource is ready, and also the policies are a lot more effective. So I'll stop here, and I can come back again later when we open the floor for discussion. But as I said, this is extremely important, and we want corporate sector to play a leading role in enhancing resilience and being ready to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Harjeet Singh ji. And with that, setting the context for and the tone for today's discussion, may I request Dr. Manu Gupta the founder of Seeds organization, who has put the seed of the seed, and also disaster risk reduction in the civil society area. So he has been a forerunner in the civil society to think parallelly with the Yokohama conference in 1994, and Dr. Manu Gupta starting Seeds in 1994 speaks volumes about his vision. Without being between you and the audience, may I request you now, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ratnoo Saab, and I have profound respect for you in the way you have shaped and led the National Institute of Disaster Management, which is our India's apex organization when it comes to disaster management training. So it's a privilege and honor to be here, part of the panel chaired by you and my dear friend Harjeet, with whom we have spent many cups of tea and many discussions together on trying to look at the issues that we are faced with today. So as you know, our chair and co-chair have really touched upon, the issue around disasters and climate change are now touching each and every life. And the best example was the COVID, the pandemic, which actually impacted the entire society. And we have seen very vivid scenes on our television sets about how the most marginalized, the migrant workers, were impacted the most by this pandemic, even before the disease actually struck many parts of the country. The pandemic may be one black swan event, but what is really happening is that such large, unprecedented kind of crisis events are now becoming the new normal. And how are we prepared? How are we looking at corporate policies, the governance policies, the institutional policies around preparing for this disaster? So I thought I should share some points around that. Just to elaborate a little bit more on the problem statement. One is, of course, the trend of disasters. I think this is relevant for all of us to consider. We are, as Mr. Harjeet said, the climate-induced disasters are increasing. We are reaching a point where we would be impacted by a disaster event on a daily basis. This year's report by the Center for Science and Environment says that out of 273 days until September end, 242 days there were disaster incidents in our country. And so with that kind of phenomena, how are we looking at future? That's one important issue. The second point is that we have largely been a very response-oriented society. So if there is a crisis, we'll respond to it. And it is very apparent the amount of resources government of India has to spend. If you look at the 15th Finance Commission, we are now spending 29,000 crores every year only on post-disaster response. The NDRF, some colleagues are here already, is a unique force in the world which responds to disaster. Even they are needing to expand on their strength and capacity considering the number of events that they have to manage every year. And what is particularly important for us also is to see that disasters in urban areas are impacting the poorest the most. And the way they impact is, we've seen in Chennai, we have seen in urban disasters in last few years, they impact the bottom of the pyramid, the people who are living in low-income settlements where those areas get waterlogged, the small and micro enterprises. In Chennai, as per the studies, a third of the micro enterprises after the 2015 floods never even came back. And imagine these small and medium and micro enterprises, which are a tremendous potential for employment for a large workforce, are all going out of business because of such disasters. So I think these are trends that are important for us because obviously they are impacting the most marginalized in our societies, but they are also on the whole taking us back on much of the development investments that we are making. So what do we do in such a case? For centuries, in our case also, the government has been the primary duty bearer when it comes to disaster management. But in recent years, Ratnoo Sahab mentioned about the Yokohama framework, then there have been more recent frameworks, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and there is a Prime Minister's 10-point agenda as well, which has increasingly spoken about the partnership approach, which brings the Samaj, the Sarkar and the Bazaar together, the market forces, the civil society and governments together. And it particularly looks at what can be those synergies between the three major pillars of our society in bringing about not just a better response, but from response we are moving into building resilience. And when I say building resilience, it is a transformative process where we are now not just looking at recovering from a loss, but also preparing communities for future. And I think this is one of the basic tenets or changes that you need to think about when it comes to corporate governance. The corporate governance has business continuity as one of its very fundamental sort of tenets, but I think we have to go beyond business continuity. You have to look at business resilience, and when we speak about business resilience, we will have to relook at how we are currently, whether it is HSE, whether it is ESG or any other corporate practices that need to be revisited. Again, just from examples, I have a friend in Manila who represents the private sector in that city. And the city of Manila, like many of the cities in India, is also suffering from frequent flooding incidents. And every time there is a flood in the city due to heavy rainfall, we find that employees are first of all worried about going back home in time because they are worried about families, they are worried about getting stuck on the road, etc. And this was impacting productivity in a big way. And so the private sector came together, their security agencies came together to see how this factor about the workforce getting worried, the work operations getting impacted due to these kind of frequent heavy rain events in Manila can be better secured by improving on the corporate governance policies. And some of those things included, taking care of families, improving communications, things that many people in this room are experts in. So I think I'm not going to get into those details, but just to highlight that these are areas that require support. Off-site also is where communities live and where communities coexist with many other systems, the natural systems, the government systems there. And how do we leverage resources in those local areas where the catchment areas are, is something that we need to look at in much more detail. Ratnoo Sahab spoke about on-site disaster management plans, and I completely second that. Disaster management plans have to now go beyond just looking at incident commands and response to any crisis situations, but to more long-term risk assessments, transformative policies and practices that can help absorb shocks and be able to survive and even thrive in spite of such disasters. Last point, sir, was about the most vulnerable and the most marginalized. That's an area of concern because, as we all know, disasters disproportionately impact women and children in any given situation, and that is a factor that needs to be considered. Equally so, we find that disasters have a very different level of impact on people with disability. While this is recognized and this is somewhere acknowledged by all of us, we have been all in that practice for a very long time, we somehow don't look at policies and practices that reflect those inequities. And it starts from few very basic issues like improved targeting. How do we reach out to people who are on the margins? If we go in any village, the people who are the most excluded people are actually living in the most vulnerable areas, the low-lying areas, for example, or on the coast of on the river banks, in those areas, which get flooded immediately. Or they would have houses which are kacha, and they need to be, they will lose all their assets in even a low level of floods. So I think targeting, creating systems where there are local support mechanisms for them, mutual support mechanisms, and then looking at how do we prepare them and also be able to evacuate them better in such emergencies. I remember a case where they said that in Indonesia, after the tsunami, they said they have a very good siren system to warn people whenever there is a tsunami. But actually, this does not help people with hearing impairment. So there is no way that people with hearing impairment could hear those sirens. Until then, there was a policy shift, and then they have now practices that, in addition to just sirens, to be able to help people which have such disabilities. So one can go on, but I think the point that I'm trying to make is we have to move from just response to building resilience given the scenario. We have to look at both corporate governance practices that are off-site as well as on-site that factor in the elements of resilience. And then in terms of ensuring that no one gets left behind, we need to improve on targeting, on better local security nets for communities so that the people with the maximum vulnerability are taken care of and nobody gets left behind. So I'll stop here, sir, and then I'll let others speak.
Thank you, Manu Gupta sir. In the era of cell phone where our span of attention is very poor, so for those who are either having a nap or busy with their mobile phone, they can spare 30 seconds so that I can summarize his session and the major takeaways from Dr. Manu Gupta. Spoke about the poor and urban poor in the changing scenario of climate change and the disasters, how it is impacting. Also the very interesting phrase of Samaj, Sarkar and Bazar, how they have to work harmoniously. And just to rephrase that, can I call it Janadhar, Sarkar and Bazar, so that looks more phonetic. And also from business continuity to business resilience, and from a response-oriented approach to a resilience approach. And also he has given a very, very important food for thought, that how we go for a more focused and more improved targeting so that we can target the real poor, whether it's a corporate or government. I think that's a major, major challenge, and I think many of the policies are working, but I think it requires even another session to discuss that, what can be the real tools. With that, we move forward to our next panelist, Mr. Chakradhari Rowe. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Who is security architect and instructor at Tango 6 o'clock. And I think we still have time in 6 o'clock, but your time is not up to 6 o'clock, so you have to sum up a little earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Sir. the tango is basically a synonym for a threat. And I think right now it does mean that, you know, the threat is at our six. When we talk about climate change and disaster management, I think 2020 was probably the biggest wake-up call that we received, you know, our generation, my generation. What this disaster basically did was it made man, my neighbor, my family, my enemy. Because COVID, anybody could carry COVID. And you know, that was a very rude awakening for a lot of us. When our neighbors, somebody we would rather, you know, count on, we were looking at our neighbors as, you know, somebody who's a threat to us. So starting from there, I think we got this planet as a very clean planet when we got started. And I'm reminded of this, you know, this phrase, be more, have more, and do more. So in an attempt to be more, in an attempt to have more, we started chasing having more so much that we forgot to be more. And when I say this, you know, what I mean by saying this is that when you start having more, you are having more because you are making certain changes to the environment. Whether it's digging up oil, digging up minerals, cutting down trees, building up cities, concrete jungles, and all these things, building factories. So we have, you know, unsettled the nature and the environment to a very great extent, where we have not been able to, you know, build our capabilities to handle the disaster that would come back to us. And that has been our biggest challenge. And my focus, I think here I have come up with notes to speak and focus on human continuity and human resilience. And that's where I'm talking about, you know, the aspect of security. Because whenever there is a disaster, the first thing that kicks in, of course, 2020, I'm not sure how many of us know this, but because the people who were stepping out of the house stopped doing so, there was a huge stress. The disaster was not really outside. The disasters started happening within the families. You know, domestic violence started going up. This is a very, ignored fact about, COVID-19. So I'm talking about the security aspect of disaster management and climate change. You know, sir was talking about that 3 degrees is going to go up, you know, in the coming days. So from that perspective, are we building our policies, whether it's corporate policies, whether it's government policies, or our personal policies? Are we doing, or are we focusing on building our policies, including the person, that is you and me? Are we keeping us at the center of this entire policy and not just looking at business continuity and, from the business aspect? So I think my small take to get this thing started would be, let's start focusing from the building blocks that's you and me. And we have to keep ourselves at the center of every single policy, every single procedure that we are putting together to, handle disasters and climate change in a very, very effective way. So, thank you so much.
I think you have limited yourself not 6 minutes. Thank you for that very precise and bringing some insights from the COVID-19. And may I now request our next panelist, Dr. Sunita Reddy, Professor JNU, for her presentation.
Presentation.
Good evening, everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to be here among all the distinguished scholars, personalities, and I really thank IISSN for giving me this opportunity, and especially Colonel Sen, Professor Satush
Kumar, and I thank Dr. Ratnoo to give this opportunity for me to share some of my experiences of being in the area of disasters. I have been trained as an anthropologist and been teaching public health for the past 19 years in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And my first interface with disasters was tsunami in 2005. So I would like to share. How can I have the remote, please? Is that good? Okay. Yes. So, as I said, I would like to share my experiences of being there in the relief phase to rehabilitation to reconstruction. And this is a kind of research which very often is neglected, the longitudinal research in the sense to document the people's life from the event of disaster to long-term reconstruction of which takes more than 5 years. I've been visiting to the islands for almost 2005 to 2010, and I was trying to understand people's perspective at the same time from the admin perspective, the challenges which the administration was facing, and came up with some documentation of what was happening, especially the challenges faced by the administration, at the same time the needs and aspirations and the demands by the local communities. And as you know, Andamans is a mixed group of settlers and also the tribes. Most affected were the Nicobaris. But then what I saw was there was a huge gap, which I call it as a bureaucratic norm and emergent norm. And the gap was because the aspirations and what the communities were asking for was not able to be fulfilled by the administration because of their own set of reasons, being an island which is away from the mainland and kind of challenges to bring in all the resources and the kind of rehabilitation which was going on. So this was one of the documentation, the long-term documentation which I carried, that I'll be talking a bit on that. But at the same time, I would like to also focus on, as a social scientist, to look at disasters as social phenomenon. And as my co-panelists earlier talked about vulnerabilities and especially the vulnerable population, and looking at the inequities which are already existing in the communities. So how do we see the vulnerable population, and how do we have inclusive policies to bring in parity in terms of not just relief, which is very often done very efficiently, but the long-term reconstruction, rehabilitation, where many stakeholders leave the space. It's a government which remains for a long time. However, we talk about community as the first responders, but I have seen in all my disaster experiences, the community is also the last responders. Because after a while, after couple of years, everybody leaves, but then the communities still are trying to build up their lives. At the same time, I'll very briefly talk about the link between the disaster and development and the community participation, and generally we take community participation as a term or a concept which is not given a deeper thought. I just thought I should share that. And of course, an idea which I would like to put before all of you as to look into the health as a corporate governance and corporate hospitals which can do a lot during disasters. So the tsunami experiences which I talked about is published in this book, Clash of Waves, and this was published in 2012 and was released at NDMA. And in fact, as I said, the gap which existed is very much there, and it has the experiences of both the sides, not just the community but also the administration. And there were a lot of unintended consequences. Though we go with a lot of good intentions to do a lot good during disasters or post-disasters, but not knowing the community and their culture and their social fabric, we tend to harm more than doing good. And that's what was covered in this book. And as I said, we have to really look at some of the case studies. In fact, I want to briefly talk about the shelters which were constructed in these islands. And if you can see, these are the beautiful shelters which they always had, very eco-friendly, made of natural resources, but closer to the shore. However, the design was such that they can shake but they will never fall. Even high tides, they were safe. They had space for their livestock. They had very well ventilated housing. And if we see the kind of prototypes which were built after tsunami for the community to consider, because the administration was not willing to keep them anywhere closer to the shore, and they said you have to move up to the hill. And thereby they were giving prototypes, but then they decided to be on the floor rather than on still if they are on the top of the mountain. However, the relief camps which were there not for a few months, and you can imagine the life of families with one shelter, one room, living with parents, older couples, and also young children for years together, 3 to 4 to 5 years. So the privacy is one important issue which we never thought about. However, it took time. It took almost 4 or 5 years because, again, being islands far away, it took a lot of time for them to construct the houses. However, they made their own arrangements to have some kind of seating arrangements to be with the communities. And that's how the housing was, again, a kind of expectations which were different from the community, but it was different for the administration. I would like to bring to your notice this very interesting book, The Shock Doctrine, by Naomi Klein, and she's a journalist, traveled across the world and looked into many shocks which are faced by the world, not just disasters but even wars. And most of the plans and big development projects which were resisted by the people for a long time were pushed through at the time of shock, whether it's disaster or whether it is war. So it's an interesting read to go through. Again, I would like to bring in the concept of disaster and development, the linkage, because our development should not lead to a disaster. And that's why we talk of sustainability, we talk of sustainable development, and that's where when you look at many of the developments which are happening, and sometimes leading to disasters, there's again another concept which comes through as disaster capitalism. Some of the agencies which make a lot of money during this event of disaster, but then one has to look into the ethics of making money or even doing any kind of business, wherein we need to really understand the people and how it can have a different kind of protection for the people, but most often the vulnerable are left out. And many a times you say floods, cyclones, I say silver lining, because that's again an opportunity for the kind of businesses which can really thrive during the disaster. So this is another very important concept of disaster capitalism which I want to bring to your notice. Now, as I said, when we talk of development, we need to really look into the dimensions of humans. And as we see, disasters set development a decade back, and we always talk of build back better. But how do we build back a resilient infrastructure and a development which is more sustainable? Whereby we have to see development as both modern and urban, and it has always a primacy for infrastructure building. But we often forget the experiences of people. So here in the development, we need to really look into people as both means and ends of economic development. We need to see that people are benefited at all costs, and the GNP can increase while human lives can shrivel. Many post-disaster rehabilitation, reconstruction, some of the communities are benefited and many of them are left behind. So we need to really look into that. And for human dimension, we should be preoccupied with people rather than production, and how even if we are going for production or infrastructure development, how that should benefit each and everyone, especially the survivors of any disaster. So there is a need to question development for whom, and there we need to really bring in the human balance sheet, where we can think of the development activities and how that is benefiting different people. So while incorporating the human dimension into development planning, both production and distribution objectives should be integrated. So often we have seen that distribution doesn't happen equitably, and that's where most communities get left out. And the decentralization and involving community participation, I'll talk about it in a second. Development activities should have human framework for analyzing the development and the performance. And comprehensive set of social and human development indicators need to be developed and monitored in a planned progress. Now, targets must be first express the basic human needs, and we all know in any disaster what public health aspects which come to the fore are the nutrition, education, health, housing. These are the major and the basic elements which needs to be provided to any community which has been affected by disaster. And transport, of course, is another which we have seen very well in COVID situation. And many a times we talk of tourism and a big plans for tourism development, but how far that will help the local people is to be thought through, because many of the tourist destinations again are built by the people either from outside or very few little elite from the community. Majority of the community people are left behind. So we need to really understand how it will help the local people and also understand the cultural and social attitudes and aspirations of people. And we need to really capture human stories, and that should be brought out in the annual assessments of rehabilitation program and case studies on different affected population, their economic and livelihoods, whether they have improved or deteriorated. Here is this chart. I would like all of you to take a little bit time to see how we think of community participation. You talk to anyone who will say, yes, we have taken the community participation. But they can be at different levels. If we say co-opted, on the corner is the people's participation, their local action and ownership, followed by outsiders' control. So when we talk of co-opted, it's just the outsiders' control entirely. Hardly the local people are consulted. Then we talk of cooperating, where there is a minimum consultation of the local people and mostly the outside control. Consulted, again, little more involvement of the community, but mostly controlled by outsiders. Collaborating is a better way, where you have more of local collaboration and outsiders are just facilitating. Equally is co-learning and collective action. Collective action is the best when you think of the communities which have local ownership. They think through, they have the idea and they follow it. Only minimum outside involvement. Now these things cannot be from all, for all the communities. It all depends. Yeah, it all depends on the capacities of the local communities also. So it can be co-opted, it can be collective action, but more and more importance to be given to the communities. Now, aid is another area which we actually brought in the volume. In 2008, we had this conference where NIDM was the partner and Manu Gupta ji and Dr. Santosh ji, everyone was there. And this was the book which was talking about how the aid came in like another tsunami, and how they were appropriate, sometimes misappropriate, use of the aid across different countries, and half the chapters are written by other scholars from other nations and covers almost all the Asian countries which were affected. Yeah, the last slide. And this is the book which I want to share, and again, COVID came in as an opportunity to interview through Zoom to all the experts, more than 18 experts, including Santosh ji here and then Colonel Sanjay ji is here, who have contributed to look into the building of institution and the governance issues and the challenges behind building. So we have a chapter on NDMA, NIDM, IMT, Sphere and many other, and that's an interesting output of COVID which I can share. And this is last point which I said, as seeds of disaster, roots of response, where the corporate sector can really help. And I want to really think about and want to discuss more on how corporate healthcare, especially in disasters, can be built into the DM Act, where we are all ready for any kind of disasters we have seen in COVID, so that there is a planned plan or preparedness in case of any emergencies, where Delhi being a capital and having both private and public corporate tertiary hospitals, how we can all be prepared for any emergencies in future. We'd like to stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sunita Reddy, for that tsunami of ideas. I think so many waves of ideas have been there, and I think we require many sessions to even internalize that. You started with disaster and development and how the vulnerability matrix interferes with that, and also very interesting on your book on clash of waves and unintended consequences of this thing, and shock doctrine and disaster capitalism. So many ideas you have put on table. So I remember Saina's book on Everyone Loves a Good Drought. There was an article, compilation of articles in Times of India, which has said that except the poor, everyone loves a calamity because there are big tenders, there are engineers love it, bureaucrats love it, market loves it because everybody thrives. But I think it is finally the most vulnerable and the affected communities which pay the biggest price. And just on the tsunami experiences, because my interest and this whole everlasting bond with the disaster started with my first posting as IAS officer in Tamil Nadu coastal area in Chidambaram, where I was first responder in tsunami. And just two thoughts on that how a village that became the first disaster management plan of the country in 2004 October, that I trained a community called Saniar Petai. And that has become one of the biggest global success story of how a community, if prepared, can can save lives. And I think after the Yokohama conference, the biggest event after 10 years was in the Kobe, the Hyogo, from the 18th January. The conference started, I got to know later on that the conference inaugural address started with narrating this success story as one of the biggest success story of the community resilience, which was a small work, never thinking that it would become such this thing. And one more, just experience from the tsunami, that how the disaster, if the bureaucrats are little sensitive, how this can be also an opportunity to make bridges between communities. There is a place, Parangi Petai, where that time the Muslims were not affected, while all Hindu habitations of the fishermen were affected, and I used this Muslim Jamaat to work as a volunteers. And this story of communal bonhomie that still exists, and they are so close come that the fishermen still go and help the Muslims, and Muslims help them when there is a crisis. So the calamities can be also an opportunity, the adversity can be an opportunity to make the societies more inclusive and to make bridges between the communities and to minimize them. And they can also be opportunity to polarize them also. So depend upon how we work and respond. So thank you, Sunita ji, for bringing a lot of ideas on table. And now we can open the floor to some questions, and after that I'll request Harjeet Singh ji to give his thoughts. Any questions? Either the audience is very brilliant, or they were not involved in that, or they were busy with their mobile phones. Okay, NIDM has kept the flag high. Yeah. Professor Dr. Santosh Kumar has been my predecessor in NIDM, a senior most professor, and now senior advisor to NIDM. Yes, please.
Just wanted to understand recent discussion what is the significant takeaway which we can say as a capacity building institution can take further, that how disaster risk reduction and climate change can go together for sustainable development. And that and the process that how institutions, the stakeholders can get engaged in the whole process.
So well, I was not there in COP28, but Harjeet Singh ji was there, so I can request him, or you were also there? So yeah, so Harjeet ji will be the best person to talk about that.
Thank you very much, Professor Santosh, for asking that question, particularly on capacity building. So this particular COP, and you still see a lot of analysis coming out of this conference, and depending on, it's like an elephant, depending on what part you touch and how you describe it. But I would say this was historic in so many ways, not just because for the first time it started talking about fossil fuels in a very comprehensive manner, but I'll not go deep into that. I'll come to the topics which are far more relevant. For the first time, we have been able to operationalize the global goal on adaptation. So when we talk about mitigation or reducing emissions, we have a metrics. We talk about gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced, or gigawatts of renewable energy to be installed. You can measure it, or even temperature rise scenarios. But there's nothing of that sort when it comes to adaptation. Of course, we do have targets when it comes to disaster risk reduction, but not in the sphere of adaptation. Although we did not agree the entire metrics, and the work is going to be in progress, and there's going to be a work program to look into it, but there are very specific sectors that have been identified for the first time after a 2-year-long process, that how we are going to look at the issues of food security, water security, looking at the issues related to oceans and how impacts are increasing in terms of infrastructure and how we can do more resilient building efforts in that area. Also, a very detailed decision on the adaptation cycle, how all countries now have to prepare their adaptation plans by 2025, and then so the assessment has to be done and plans have to be prepared by 2027, and there's going to be a support available much more to do that, although the Green Climate Fund already providing something called Readiness Fund for countries. Of course, India does get some money, but there are many other developing countries, the smaller ones, who would like to have more access. But the way global community came together, that was absolutely relevant for us to be engaging in and learning from that process. Another thing that, again, very significant that happened, there is something called Santiago Network on Loss and Damage that was agreed in 2019, but could not be operationalized. Now at this COP, the host has been identified, and that's going to be UNDRR, which is again very relevant for the work that we have been doing. And there was quite a bit of complex process to do that, but UNDRR is now going to be establishing that network. And again, India has a very important role to play, because for us, the kind of technologies we have, you talk about space, you talk about several, social sciences and our own response methods. I think we have a lot to share with the world community and also to learn from others. And again, NIDM can play such an important role. In fact, I've said it in many fora, that for India to engage with the loss and damage conversation, and again, another historic thing happened where the fund was operationalized. I don't think India is going to get a lot of money from that fund, which did receive $700 million, but we require hundreds of billions of dollars. And there are many more countries who are on the front line, and India being a large country cannot claim a massive share in that limited resource. But Santiago Network is going to be extremely important. So I would say adaptation, the global goal, engaging in that, and Santiago Network, where we can actually share our expertise and learn from many countries who are already responding.
Thank you, Harjeet Singh, for bringing that dimension. But I think we should also build up our narrative around the climate change performance. And India should make its claim not on the size, because West will always say that India is a big in size and you are a big GDP, why we should pay. So I think the narrative should be built around that, who did the more harm to the global climate and the India's performance. I think they should incentivize that, what was agreed at Paris and subsequent COPs, and what has been the performance record. And I'd like to draw your attention to the Climate Change Performance Index 2022, which has made India as one of among the larger, countries. India is the #1 in terms of its track on both the emissions as well as the climate change commitments that it has complied with. So this has not been made Government of India's report. This report has been brought out by some of the very independent organizations from Europe, Germany. And Climate Change Performance Index, I think, can be a very good narrative to counter the West's argument that why India should not have this thing. And we should say that, so there is something which I think India needs to counter and make a good claim for. Because one of the thing is that in this whole transition towards carbon neutrality, this will be the big, small businesses, MSME sector that will see a huge, huge challenge. And Europe bringing the carbon border adjustment tax in 2023 is going to hugely impact our exports, and particularly of the smaller businesses, and how to see that their transition towards this carbon neutrality is smoother. And I'm not sure that West has, been compliant with its agreement and its commitments towards transfer of technology. I think World Economic Forum, they call something First Movers Coalition, but that is all seen to be something which is to push the business interests of the big technological innovations of West and not of India. So anyway, let us not go into that, but thank you for bringing that right. Next question from any other question from audience? We already exceeded time. Yes, please.
Question or
Equity, inclusiveness and equity, that is the theme. So I'll not be biased because you are from my institute.
Yeah, so I have a question here. That we are talking about building the capacity in the country, and we have certain commitments also. We have more than 1 crore security personnel working in the private sector in this country, which is much more than the combined strength of defense services, central paramilitary forces and state police. They can play a big role in terms of being the responder, and also how can organization like NDMA or NIDM collaborate with the center of excellence in the private sector to take this capacity building forward, make the entire private security personnel, even the community, react and respond to various challenges that we intend to tackle in days to come. How can that framework, is there any thought regarding this, that how can we leverage that strength?
Yeah, I think there is a panelist.
I'm audible. Sir, I think you brought out a very, very brilliant point here. I think it's more than 1 crore. The last numbers, what I heard from Mr. Kumarji, CAPC chairman, I think it was more than 1 crore. So I think the most important thing is, point number 1, we need to prepare them. Their training plays a very, very important role. However, the biggest challenge that the security industry is facing right now is the inability to train everyone because of the attritions that are happening. The mandatory PASARA trainings that are actually required by them, those are not being, completely met as far as the challenges is concerned. Now, coming to the point that you said, using this massive force in a disaster relief or disaster management scenario, I think building them and showing the people who would follow them in terms of, in times of disaster, I think that is very important. There has to be an operational hierarchy shown to the people, because these guys, the guards are everywhere. So if there is a disaster that strikes somewhere, I should have the confidence to follow a guard. If that confidence is not built into people, then that's where our biggest handicap will be.
No, my question was not that. PASARA doesn't include any topic pertaining to business continuity or climate change or disaster. It is purely physical security. I am talking about organization like NDM and NIDM thinking about creating and collaborating with certain center of excellence in this country to take forward the training required for disaster management response, disaster management preparedness, even community awareness. While we talk about NDRF and SDRF, which are still very small in number when we consider the huge population that we have, why can't we leverage this 1 crore security personnel, make them as first responder by design, by amending in PASARA Act, or by collaborating with certain center of excellence like ISSM, and take this forward in an institutional way. This is what I wanted to say.
Thank you for bringing this thought on table. I think while we have been talking about, and we have started our engagement with the private sector, and you'll be happy to know that today we are both coming from an event which was there for business resilience and business continuity. So I think this can become part of that, not only because expecting a private security agency which has already its commitment for certain delivery of services to a different client, expecting them to do the public service, maybe overextending that responsibility, and also there is again around the politic narrative that can be built around that will be not accepted at a particular levels, because that may be shrinking the responsibility of the state from responding to. But certainly they can be first responder in the organizations where they are working, and in this seminar or in this event when we are talking about business resilience, and role of the corporate, I think they can be leveraged largely into the implementers or the first layer of defense in your particular thing, and according to the risk zonation where your particular industry or the unit is located, they can be tuned or oriented towards those particular risks and how to respond better to those risks. Whether those risks are inside that premises because of a hazardous chemical or something being there, those risks may be because of its vulnerability to fire, those risks may be external because of the seismic vulnerability or any landslide proneness or other things. So these people, if they are trained well, they can be surely first responders and till the other external help from SDRF and other things come, they can be the ones which can be savior of those particular organizations where large number of employees are working. So we can engage with such center of excellences, and we'll be happy to explore the possibilities of such partnership and how we can find the synergy and convergence.
Just to add on this, which you have mentioned, this is also opening a new dimension of the security training itself. Like even if the security persons, they are there located in the coastal zone or in the landslide area or in the high earthquake areas, the first dependency will come on them, and also people will look at them that they are the trained forces and they should support them. But they are not equipped to do a response to that kind of a situation. So idea is, meaning is a twofold. One is that they can get engaged in the capacity building initiatives and also support that program, and otherwise they can also review their own system of training and capacity building program. This is a twofold.
I totally agree. When I was listening to Dr. Reddy, she talked about collaboration.
We will talk on the margins of this thing, because
Just a quick point, as you rightly said, the experts in security, it can be leveraged because if we can build into the policy at NDMA level and the training programs at the NIDM level, because during disasters, especially like COVID, we have seen the public sector was already doing, but corporate hospitals were doing as a response, not as a preparedness. But if we can develop that in the policy in DM Act, likewise all the experts in the security, and likewise for social workers who are into psychosocial care, I think we need to see the resources which are available in our country and have a white paper or a policy so that the trainings can be done at the time of emergency. Everyone can pitch in without waiting for any further discussions on that.
Thank you.
May we take the last question? Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. This is regarding, we are talking about the climate change. How can it be put into the corporate governance? It is very important, since we are talking climate change as a source of disaster and building resilience in the corporate governance. So each corporate house, based on its size, can plan a proper climate action plan. We have a very good example from the Brij Mohan Munjal University, and they have created an industry where every employee, even industry, is creating the green credit and actions. Like India promises that we can give you 2 billion tons of per annum, carbon credits. If every industry starts planning this way on climate adaptation point of view, right from the weather services, routine activity, to their usage pattern, their food pattern, their waste management pattern. So this is a way where we can really drive climate adaptation right into each industry up to the last mile. And aggregating these is going to contribute huge benefits to the country towards our journey in the climate adaptation and then disaster risk reduction. And this is also going to be monetized. So it's a food for thought for all the industries which are here. And it goes for the security agency also. They can be part of the systems, and the way COVID has shown, these private security guards have played a major role. Each state has got center of excellences. Like I'll quote IIT ISM Dhanbad, which has helped so much in the tunnel, operation which was there in the Uttarakhand, or in,
What is the question?
The question is, what is the plan of corporate industry towards climate adaptation from employee to the industry levels?
Thank you very much. I think that has been the endeavor of this workshop, to see that the corporates imbibe and mainstream the disaster risk reduction into their planning and also execution. And that is also Honorable Prime Minister's 10-point agenda, where the first point says that in every vertical of governance, disaster risk reduction has to be imbibed and mainstreamed. And that is also the spirit of Disaster Management Act 2005 and endeavor of both NDMA, NIDM and other agencies of government, as well as other, that corporate also imbibe DRR and led the disaster risk resilience, because India being a developed country and becoming 2047, a 30 trillion US dollar economy will not be possible if we do not understand that there are risks associated with each of the supply chains, and how to understand those risks, how to map those risks, and how to make risk mitigation strategies at every point of supply chain. Unless we go into those tools and techniques, it will not happen. So from talks, we have to get down to the action and also equip our corporate for the right kind of tools. And for that, yesterday also I had a meeting with the UNDRR's head for South Asia and East Asia to exactly discuss that there are tools developed and we are going to have them, and to have more meaningful discussion and engagement with the corporate and civil society to see that how we can create resilience at different agencies. With that, I think we will conclude this session, because there is a time for valedictory session now. Thank you very much.
Well, for the uninitiated and preoccupied with mobiles, respected chairs, recapitulation and summarizing of each talk was very thoughtful and very helpful. We thank our distinguished panel for insightful discussions that will help to pave way for more sustainable, inclusive, socially responsible business practices and help in building resilience in corporate governance. We'd like to present mementos to our honorable speakers. I request Shri Rajendra Ratnoo, DG IISSM, to kindly do the honors.